I would have loved to have been there a long time ago when the first two humans, or first few humans, pointed at something and made a sound to represent that. Whether it was a rock or a tree, an animal, anything. I would have liked to have been there just to see how that happened. One person points, makes a sound, and the other agrees. And then maybe they look at each other and point at each other and make a sound, giving each other names. And from that moment forward, nothing is the same. From that moment forward, human beings begin to label and categorize the world, and language begins. And at that point in time, we didn't know the door that had opened up because 10,000 years ago, 5,000 years ago, all of the material that we use to make everything that we make today was on Earth at that time. And just nobody knew it. Nobody knew what to do with it. Nobody knew that you could do anything with it. And right now, there's probably things, material, there's certain ways to arrange things that exist today that we just don't know about. But that's how it is. And when we first discovered that we could rearrange the world for our own practical purposes, that changed everything. I wonder if it was a slow incline, or I wonder if it was like a bolt of lightning. I wonder if a certain group of people slowly formed language over time, or if one day it was just available. I'm genuinely curious. Because things like, even just the ability, like, say you could go back 50,000 years, and you could approach a group of people and say, that haunch of meat there, it's raw, but if you get a fire going and cook that haunch, that shit's going to be a lot better. Even fire was something that was on Earth and available for an incredible period of time, and humans didn't even know it. Something as simple as fire existed, but nobody was there to come along and just say the words a certain way to basically unlock that potential. And once we started to see that we could do that, things increased exponentially. Things started happening really fast after we understood that we could, like, rearrange the planet, essentially. We weren't just defending ourselves constantly against it, because that was the arrangement for quite some time. Like, the state of affairs today that exists right here has been the dream of humanity for God only knows how long. Everybody can eat, just about. Everybody has a home. Everybody's in extreme relative comfort. But there's certain things that we couldn't have foreseen. For example, we've always wanted there to be enough food for everybody, but we had no idea that it would lead to a serious obesity problem. We never crossed our minds. We just knew that we wanted that sort of security, but these sort of things happen. And then things started to shape, like politics, the formation of states. And once human beings started to move beyond orally passing down information, and we started writing it down, then things really took off, because the ability of somebody to spend 40 years researching a certain subject, their entire life essentially, and then take that information and store it somewhere like a school, and then somebody can come along and digest that information in a few months and then add to it. That's essentially been the state of affairs for a while now, and it's speeding up. It's getting faster, because information, they call it today the information age, because we are bathing in information. And it's weird because when information moves faster, history moves faster. When you're not reliant on letters to send information, when information can move instantly, events move faster. So this thing will move faster and faster until we either plateau or we don't. I honestly don't think we will plateau because I'm one to think that once we have computing power at a certain level, and we're getting there, that is essentially like near our last invention because our tendency to create an intelligence that's independent of us in our image runs directly parallel to God's tendency to create an intelligence independent of Him. It's the same tendency, it's the same desire, it's the same feeling. And it's interesting because one wonders what is available now that we just simply don't know about. And as information expanded, we started to notice that there are almost people who are born to do certain things. There are people who are born with just this fire of an interest in something that's very, very specific. There are people who are born to speak, who are born to be chemists, teachers. Somehow there's this element to us that is the feeling of interest, and that goes across relationships and jobs and passions. We have this thing that guides us in the form of interest, which is an extremely mysterious thing because your interests come from where? When you feel that feeling of interest, even if it's something that's very, you know, maybe not popular or mainstream, maybe it's some obscure, but you just have this interest in it. What is that? The combined sum of you finds these things, whether it's a color, a favorite food, a favorite type of music, a favorite song, a favorite person, a favorite place. It pulls you and grabs you, and it has a gravity. And it's almost like this one of many forms of guidance that just bring us along. Interest is this feeling of static, and all of a sudden, among the static, something of color emerges, and it catches our eye, and we must explore it. We must be around it. Human beings have this huge list of almost infinite dichotomies that go together. One of them is this sort of sense that human beings have a divine element as well as an animal element. Some people you'll notice are more animal than human, and you'll notice some other people are almost too human, and they're not animal enough. Some people are unable to do things that require passion, at least not able to do it in a way that satisfies them. And other people are too passionate. Of course, as with all things, it's a balance. It's both in flux. There's nothing sentient or angelic about sex. Sex is a very animal activity. And there are a lot of things like that. You can see in the way somebody moves, in the way somebody speaks, exactly how far on each end of the spectrum they are. I've met people who are just, they don't think ahead. They don't have a sense of order. They don't have a sense of discipline. And they appear and behave as more animalistic. And this is across every race, every gender. This is all human beings. And there are others who are too disciplined, who are too regimented, who think too much ahead, who are too organized. You see, there's always this ratio of opposites. And when two opposites are working together seamlessly, you have a third thing that comes up. And that third thing is the synergy of those opposites. In the same way that your left hand and your right hand working together equal the third thing, which is coordination, that spans across everything that we do. Your left foot and your right foot working together are a third thing, which is walking. Your left foot and your right foot independently are not walking. It's only their combined activity that moves you forward. And everything is like that. If there is something that's wrong, if there is something about you that is wrong with your behavior and you know it, and people around you have been either bluntly telling you about it or basically showing you that something's been wrong for a long time, there's a very, very good possibility that you're just out of whack, that you're 70-30 instead of 50-50. Now, sometimes some situations call for 90-10, 95-5, but you always have to go back to center. Center is where you live. Center is infinite potential. Center is nothing and everything. Center is in real time responding and awaiting stimuli. But if you're just stuck on 90 in one direction all the time and you can't get out of it, things will not go well for you. They just won't. But center, I'm talking about the center of centers. When you have millions of sets of opposites working together in almost this web where you really feel a palpable sense within you of balance. These things are actual palpable senses. They're not just theoretical intellectual exercises. These things in day-to-day life as a human being are real palpable experiences. Some people are too fixated on the past. Some people are too fixated on the present. Some people are too fixated on the future. Some people don't know how to love. Some people have been hurt in the past. Some people have had a terrible childhood. Each one of those situations requires specific navigation. And the reason why therapy exists as such is because words are all you need. The reason why a therapist sits there and listens to you is because they're compiling the right set of words to put back at you to arrange your mind and your thoughts in such a way that it is untangled. Words alone can do that. I don't want to overhype words because obviously the other half of that equation is action. But sometimes action precedes words and words precede action sometimes. But there are just so many sets of opposites that all work together in this giant collection, this giant web. And there are spots within that are not as they should be, that are not healthy. And it causes a complete waste of energy. You're losing energy. It's bleeding out of you in that event. If there are memories that you have that when you think about them, they pull out of you a real emotional response, then there is something about that particular circumstance that is yet unresolved, and it needs something. It's calling for you. It's pulling your attention to that. Often you don't have these thoughts. These thoughts have you because there's something there that needs examination. And people try to bury these things. They do. And I've been guilty of it myself as well. Of course, pain, nobody likes pain. But we are all our own psychological surgeons in a way. Because emotions, social dynamics, everything has a shape. Everything has a shape. That sounds super weird, but when you understand, let's say hypothetically there's two people, and you know those two people, and you know that relationship between them inside and out. That relationship to you, if you know the relationship, will have a shape. It'll have a feeling. That's how well you know it. And all things are like that. When somebody is pursuing somebody else and that other person is pulling away, that's a shape. When two people are coming into each other with a lot of force, that's a shape. When a marriage has fallen apart, it is because of a series of shapes, of different psychological entanglements that have not fit together or have fit together and come apart. We look at artificial intelligence, and our biggest criticism of it is that it doesn't feel. It's a criticism to tell an entity that it doesn't feel. It's considered a negative to only think rationally. And human beings, we tend to want to depend on one or the other. We tend to want to depend on rationale because it seems like a safer bet. But the combined sum of good rationale is a feeling. And it's pretty remarkable what human beings are actually capable of. The question of what a human being actually is still sort of open. The question of a lot of things is still open. But we know something is going on. We know that human beings have a lot in common with other animals on the planet. But we also know that human beings are somehow very, very different. There is something that we recognize in a wild animal, but there's also something in a wild animal that is utterly alien, utterly chaotic, and we just don't know what that animal is thinking or what it's going to do. And part of us can identify with that situation when we're in the most dire of circumstances. Knowing has a cost. The ability to forecast the future comes at a price. You sacrifice your present. You sacrifice energy now in theorizing on what could be. The essential equation is what should be versus what is. And the thing is, there is literally infinite directions. So you could theorize about the future without end. You could, if you if you wanted to, you could think out every theoretical avenue that could unfold. But when most people think about the future, including myself when I was younger, I would think about the future as this thing that I had to basically defend against. It was less about my will carving its way through the future, and it was more me preparing myself for the foreseeable downsides of what is to come. But this is the thing. As I've gotten older, there's something I've noticed. You can think about the future and future events, and you can theorize. But when the moment comes, we will most likely act spontaneously. And once that happens enough, once you see that enough, once you spend maybe a good part of your 20s theorizing about different avenues, about different ways things could unfold, and then you just behave spontaneously, you stop being obsessed with theorizing, because it really is almost masturbation. Eventually you get to this point where you just have experienced enough and things have gone well enough. They've gone bad sometimes, yeah, but overall they've gone well enough to where you're basically just trusting yourself to improvise, essentially, in any situation. That's what it is. A person should adopt that sooner rather than later, I would say, because you save a tremendous amount of energy. I mean, a tremendous amount. And that energy can be repurposed and focused on actually animating yourself. I mean, if you're just going through situation after situation with a loose plan, obviously a direction, but just trusting yourself and just being there, you're going to be just fine. You're going to navigate just fine, more often than not. Because when you're walking up a set of stairs, you don't need to know what's on the 500th step. You know you're walking upstairs. All you need to do is put your foot on the step above the one that you're on now and just keep doing that. You don't need to know what's on number 450, 400 at all. It doesn't do you any good to know. And if you did know, it would just be like, oh, that's cool. Oh, I'll see that when I get there. It's not necessarily relevant. Somebody said once that worry is misused imagination. And I tend to agree, because there is useful worry, obviously. There is a time to worry, but it's definitely not most of the time. And it's interesting. Something like a seed that you put into the ground that grows and turns into something massive. Just this tiny little seed turns into this huge oak tree. A seed is basically this little node that you put into the ground that pulls out of its environment and directs those materials. It's basically a little pocket of information. It's this little spot that collects its environment and directs it, which is super interesting. And human beings, it's amazing how I was thinking about this recently. Unless you do something consciously to alter the population distribution, the fact that male and female are born in a way that almost always equates to 50-50 is remarkable. There's never a 90-10. There's never even a 75-25. there are societies where the male female ratio is out of whack, but that's because they did some engineering, they did some, male preference or something. But in societies where there is no manipulation, it's 50-50. Isn't that strange? What is it that keeps things in line like that? What knows? What is it that knows to keep things balanced?